form at JC, that would have been my first recollection of Bruce Golden. Bruce has a long career in public life and politics. In fact, at the age of 24, he became the youngest person ever elected to Parliament. A member of Parliament for 3 different constituencies, he was elected leader of the Jamaica Labour Party in 2005 and became Prime Minister of Jamaica in 2007. Bruce Golden is well known as an engaging speaker, and this afternoon we will have the pleasure of hearing him share his thoughts at this 3rd G. Arthur Brown Memorial Lecture. Help me, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome former Prime Minister of Jamaica, Horace Bruce Golden, to the podium.
Governor Richard Biles, members of the Board of the Bank of Jamaica, and members of staff of the Bank of Jamaica. Let me also recognize the Minister of Finance, the former Minister of Finance, and the hope-to-be Minister of Finance of the Bank of Jamaica, and members of staff of the Bank of Jamaica. Let me also recognize the Minister of Finance, the former Minister of Finance, and the hope-to-be Minister of Finance. Now you understand the raindrop through which I have to travel. Ladies and gentlemen, in a little over a week from now, Jamaica will celebrate its 60th anniversary as an independent nation. 3 months ago, the Bank of Jamaica marked its 61st anniversary, and its history, therefore, is chronologically intertwined with that of independent Jamaica. Last year, the BOJ got its own independence as a central bank with a clearly defined mandate that is so crucial to Jamaica's well-being and its future. Undeserved though it is a far greater tribute to me than it is to G. Arthur Brown for me to have been asked to deliver this lecture on the 100th anniversary of the birth of this outstanding Jamaican and one of our most distinguished public servants of all times. As Richard pointed out, there have only been 2 such lectures in the past, and you can appreciate my sense of intimidation when I take account of the fact that those 2 lectures were delivered by 2 titans, so Sridhar Rampal and the Most Honorable P.J. Pattison. I come to you, therefore, and perhaps will leave when I'm through as an underdog. G. Arthur Brown's career is nothing short of spectacular. In 1957, while still in his 30s, he was named to head the Central Planning Unit, the precursor of the National Planning Agency, which later became the Planning Institute of Jamaica. It was in that role that he was principally responsible for the preparation of Jamaica's first National Development Plan and published the first annual Economic Survey of Jamaica, a document that has become a go-to source for any serious discussion or analysis of our performance as a nation over the years. When we attained independence in 1962, G. Arthur Brown was appointed Financial Secretary and head of the Civil Service. 5 years later, he became the first Jamaican governor of the Bank of Jamaica. His expertise was internationally recognized, and in 1978, he became the second in command at the United Nations Development Program. He returned to the position of governor of the Bank of Jamaica in 1989, in which he served until his retirement from public service in 1992. G. Arthur Brown's public service career at both the national and international levels spanned 48 years. And it is hardly necessary for me this evening to spend time heaping encomiums on him, so much having long been said are a matter of public record, and some of which was captured in the dissertation titled "To Know the Cause of Things," a compilation of selected speeches he made, and so aptly titled because it is the motto of his alma mater, the London School of Economics. The G. Arthur Brown lily clearly does not need or deserve to be gilded. What I find most significant in looking back at that remarkable career is the fact that it placed him on the pitch during the period not only of our transition from colonialism to independence, but of our efforts with both successes and missteps to find the path to sustained economic development. It is in that latter perspective that I seek to focus your attention today. In doing so, I will allude to his contribution and some of his timely interventions, and the sharp relevance that I find in those interventions to the challenges we face today. But the issue is much larger than G. Arthur Brown. I cannot say that I knew him well at a personal level, but in my limited interaction with him while I served in the cabinet during the 1980s, apart from being overawed by his expertise, his candor, his dedication as a public servant, and his enduring commitment to Jamaica, I detected in him some frustration and disappointment. He was a technocrat, a policy technician, a counselor, an advisor. But final decisions were made not by him, but by politicians, like what I used to be. He respected that separation of roles. He was faithful to whichever government the people had elected. But I believe he agonized when we screwed up, when we made the wrong choices, when we opted for propitiation instead of sound and proven economic policies. And by doing so, we missed opportunities that could have been significant game changers in our quest to achieve economic development and a robust quality of life for our people. The late Norman Manley, in his farewell speech as he exited public life, that was in 1969, he said that the mission of his generation was to secure political power and win self-government for the people of Jamaica. The mission of the generation that followed, he said, was to reconstruct the social and economic society and life of Jamaica. Of his generation's task, he proudly proclaimed, "Mission accomplished." 3 generations have ensued, including my own. What can we say of our discharge of the mandate that he prescribed? How have we run our leg in that relay? In looking back at the period spanned by these 3 generations, we're inclined to be cynical, even self-condemnatory, and there is much to be cynical about. In our 60 years of independence, the Jamaican economy grew by 135% after 60 years. That is an average of 1.4% a year. That could not be what Norman Manley had in mind when he identified the mission of the generation that succeeded his. Although it is higher, the economy per capita income today is higher than it was in 1962. The most recent IMF Article 4 staff report makes the chilling observation, and the Minister of Finance made reference to it in his budget presentation. This was a report issued by the IMF in February of this year, and it made the chilling observation that GDP per capita is lower today than it was in 1970. That is 52 years ago. Let that sink in for a moment. In 1962, Jamaica's murder rate was 3.9 per 100,000, one of the lowest in the world. Last year, it was 53.6 per 100,000, one of the highest in the world. That certainly could not have been what Norman Manley was expecting when he spoke about reconstructing the social life of Jamaica. Our social mores have deteriorated. Norman Manley, and indeed G. Arthur Brown, would be distressed to see the degradation of our values, the comfort level we seem to have with corruption, our lack of civility and respect for each other, the indiscipline and uncouth behavior that has become our norm, the level of violence we wreak on each other, the eagerness with which we disagree and confront, and our reluctance to find common cause and collaborate. However, our cynicism must not be allowed to obscure our achievements. Our infrastructure is in much better shape today than it was 60 years ago. Not by any means as good as we want it to be, but those of us who occasionally attend burials at Dovecot probably would not know that in 1962, you had to travel on unpaved roads from you left the flats of Spanish Town all the way to Ginger Ridge on the border of Clarendon, where I was born. In terms of our achievements, electricity and running water, back in those days, 1962, were unavailable outside of the urban centers, not to mention telephone service, which hardly existed outside of the corporate area, Montego Bay, and a few large towns. Access to secondary education, which was a privilege enjoyed by the precious few in 1962, is now open to the children of the poor. Although the quality of that education and the outcomes are not what Norman Manley would have wanted. And that's an issue to which I will return. Our health services are far from what we would like them to be, but life expectancy today is 76 years compared to 65 years in 1962. Infant mortality, 11 per thousand, compared with 57 per thousand in 1962. In terms of institutional development, we have much to be proud about. In the financial sector, commercial activities, social development, democracy safeguards, accountability framework. Social legislation to address many of the legacies of slavery and colonialism have been enacted. A variety of social protection programs for the vulnerable, inadequate though they may be, is in place. As much as he was a patron of the cultural arts, Norman Manley could not have envisaged the impact that Jamaican music and its reggae artists have made on the world stage. He would have been overjoyed at the continuing success of our athletes. He himself having held the 100-yard schoolboy record of 10 seconds for 41 years, a time that would have qualified him for the 100-meter final at the 1912 Olympics in Stockholm. By any objective measure, our scorecard for the last 60 years is a mixed bag, a goulash of successes and failures, progress and regression, triumph and disappointment. Could we have done better? Undoubtedly. Should we have done better? Absolutely. In the decade prior to independence, Jamaica, under successive governments, had pursued a model of economic development pioneered by one of the Caribbean's great development economists, Sir Arthur Lewis. It has been referred to as industrialization by invitation. It was specifically designed to achieve economic development in the context of a virtually unlimited supply of labor. It required a tightly protected domestic market, import substitution, and considerable incentives and concessions to lure investors and capital. By modern-day orthodoxies and the Washington Consensus, it would be an anathema. By current standards of industrialization, it was primitive. These were back-end factories, the assembling of imported components, or what has been called screwdriver industries. What goes around, it says, comes around. What was called screwdriver industries is hardly different in concept from current supply chain practices, where the manufacturing process takes place in different locations and in different countries. The key determinants being the economies that are achieved and the value that is added. Primitive though it was in the early days, it worked. It started absorbing surplus labor, and perhaps more importantly, it started the transfer of technology and the inculcation of a workplace ethic, a workplace discipline that was far different from what obtained in the cane fields and the banana walks. Historical data bears this out. I mentioned before that in our 60 years of independence, the Jamaican economy grew by 135%. 3/4 of that growth occurred in the first 10 years after independence. We spent the next 50 years trying to grow the other quarter. Our macroeconomic fundamentals then were in relatively good shape. A debt to GDP ratio of 33%, with debt service requiring only 9% of the budget, a fiscal deficit of less than 1%, a balance of payments deficit of just under 4%. One may call it a beneficial deficit because it was driven largely by imports of equipment and raw materials, and I'm not including here fuel and transportation equipment and construction materials. But equipment and raw materials accounted for 44% of total imports. Inflation at that time was at 6%, and we had foreign reserves equivalent to 16 weeks of imports. During that period, G. Arthur Brown held the position of Financial Secretary and Governor of the Bank of Jamaica. And before that, he headed the Central Planning Unit. He clearly was not a mere spectator in the spectacular advancement that was being made. The story is often told of Lee Kuan Yew's visit to Jamaica shortly after we gained independence in 1962, how we took careful note of our approach to economic development, went back to Singapore and adapted it, and the rest, as they say, is history. I've never seen where he acknowledged it, but it could very well be true. In preparing for this presentation, I came across an interesting press release issued in 1962 by the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the precursor to the World Bank. That press release, which was issued in February of 1962, announced that 20 senior officials from 18 countries would be visiting Jamaica for 2 weeks to study programs of economic development. It went on to say that Jamaica was chosen, and here I'm quoting, because of the broad attack being made there on economic development problems, end of quote. Critical to our success in that first 10 years of independence was the fact that there was broad consensus between the two political parties on the development strategy to be pursued, the Arthur Lewis model. The Industrial Development Corporation, which was established in 1951 during Sir Alexander Bustamante's tenure and was headed by Robert Lightman. At his turn at the wicket, Norman Manley created a range of statutory bodies to provide the regulatory framework to enhance it. It was he who introduced the Industrial Incentives Act in 1960. And it was he who, in that same year, laid out the plans for the foreshore development along Marcus Garvey Drive to provide factory space and modern port facilities to support the industrialization effort. Not only was there broad consensus on the strategy, there was no significant disagreement on how it was being managed, how it was being executed. It is said that Wills Isaacs and Robert Lightman, as ministers from opposing parties responsible for trade and industry over the period, constantly argued with each other as to who cut the ribbon to declare open more factories. The two political parties found other things to quarrel about, like Bustamante's Sandy Gully project, or the road that Norman Manley built to open up the 7 miles of white sand beaches in Negril, or the National Stadium that he built, or the JLP's introduction of the National Insurance Scheme. But our economic development strategy transcended partisan politics, and it was all systems go. This policy consensus, I'd even like to call it the Jamaica consensus, was vital to our success then, and history would show how vital it would always be and the negative consequences that would ensue when it was ruptured. It is important to note that the essentiality of this consensus is directly related to our political and constitutional framework. Development strategies need years and even decades without interruption to achieve their objectives. In countries with one dominant political party or with political systems that are less than free democracies and where fundamental rights are not vigorously asserted, continuity may be assured. In free and competitive democracies, continuity needs consensus. Ever since adult suffrage in 1944, we have had two dominant political parties operating in a fiercely competitive democracy. Individual rights and freedoms are protected by a constitution that has withstood the test of time, even when buffeted by gale force winds. When we marvel at Singapore's success, we must ponder whether it could have been achieved within a political and constitutional system like ours. Lee Kuan Yew had some peculiar views about democracy and its relationship with economic development. He had no qualms in declaring that, and I'm quoting him, "One man, one vote is a most difficult form of government. Results can be erratic." And another quote from him, "With few exceptions, democracy has not brought good government to new developing countries." Lee Kuan Yew. This is what he had to say about elections in a democracy. And I'm quoting him again. "To win votes, you have to give more and more. And to beat your opponent in the next election, you have to promise to give more away. Presidents do not get re-elected if they give a hard dose of medicine to their people. So there's a tendency to procrastinate, to postpone unpopular policies in order to win elections, and problems such as budget deficits, debt, and high unemployment are carried forward from one administration to the next." Sounds familiar? Jamaica's growth momentum went into reversal during our second decade of independence, during which the economy declined by 22%. It coincided, although it was much more than just a coincidence, with the abandonment of the Arthur Lewis model and its replacement by a socialist model of development that involved a dominant state in control of the commanding heights of the economy, with the state being principally responsible for the creation and distribution of wealth. The consensus and continuity that had guided and undergirded our efforts for the previous 20 years had been completely dismantled. I'm obliged to put this in perspective. I served in Parliament with Michael Manley. I have absolutely no doubt that he meant well. His passion for the upliftment of the poor, for economic equality and justice, and for protecting the rights of the working class, those things can never be questioned. When he came to power in 1972, unemployment was recorded at 24%. Stark poverty stared you in the face, especially in the overcrowded settlements that had mushroomed in the corporate area and major town centers, populated mainly by people who had migrated from the rural communities in search of a piece of the industrialization pie. The trickle-down wasn't trickling down fast enough. The rural folk hardly fared any better as they became casualties of the precipitous decline of the export agriculture sector, sugar and bananas. Inequalities in income and standards of living were an embarrassment. This provided fertile ground for discontent. Better must come. And a yearning for change, power for the people. Considerable effort had been made to provide opportunity creating and social protection programs. 50 junior secondary schools were built to expand access to secondary education. Several trade training centers were opened. Cash transfers were provided through the Old Age Assistance Program to help indigents. And the National Insurance Scheme was established. Special incentives were offered to investors to locate their factories outside of the corporate area in order to spread the employment opportunities. But these were not nearly enough to staunch the discontent. Michael Manley was the perfect champion for a situation such as this. Many people hold fast to the view that the period of the 70s is when Jamaica's economic journey was derailed, and that is the root cause of our anemic performance since then. I believe that this is oversimplistic, a too convenient way of finding someone or something to blame. There is no doubt that in terms of the economy, that period set us back considerably. But there are countries that have suffered far greater calamities, including devastating and protracted civil wars, but have been able to recover and find a path to sustain growth. Many of those who boarded one of the 5 flights a day returned, even if their luggage was a bit lighter on the return journey. Lee Kuan Yew gave his assessment of Michael Manley's adventure into socialism when he wrote, and I have references in the text which I believe will be circulated, when he wrote that on his second visit to Jamaica in April of 1975 to attend the Commonwealth Heads of Government Conference, he found that Manley, quoting him, presided over the conference with panache and spoke with great eloquence, but I found his views chaotic. He advocated a redistribution of the world's wealth. The policies of the government were ruinous. Thereafter, I read the news of Jamaica with greater understanding. End of quote. Singapore is slightly smaller than the parish of St. Thomas. In reference to Jamaica, Lee Kuan Yew is quoted as one saying, "If they had given me an island of that size, close to the United States, instead of a too small, distant, poor, and dirty little island, how much more would I have been able to do?" We will never know what were G. Arthur Brown's thoughts on the policy direction of the 70s, or what advice he may have given to the decision makers. He was too astute and circumspect a public servant to ever disclose that. To put it in his own words, and I'm quoting G. Arthur Brown here, "As a public servant and technician all my life, I advocate no system and I seek support for none. There are and have been a band of us who have imposed a self-denying ordinance on ourselves not to interfere, other than by casting our ballots in the political act of choosing the direction in which a society should move. We have dedicated ourselves, once the decision has been taken to move in a certain direction, to apply all our skill and knowledge to the process of getting to the set goals. If we disagree with the goals and feel that we cannot honestly give our best, we cannot sabotage the efforts of others. We must go. Once we remain, we must apply our knowledge efficiently and impartially." One can only surmise that having been so intimately involved in developing the successful economic strategies of the 50s and 60s, G. Arthur Brown would have been discomfited by the drastic shift in policy direction. One can surmise further that his decision in 1978 to accept appointment as the second in command of the United Nations Development Program, a post for which he was clearly overqualified, was his way of taking a sabbatical. G. Arthur Brown was not an ideologue. but he was much more than a pragmatist. He sought to understand not just the cause of things, but to nail down the things that made other things work. I come now to the third decade of independence, and that saw a major policy shift. Not a return to the Arthur Lewis model of encouraging foreign investment in a sterile, protected space. The new dynamics of the Western world, insisted upon by the multilateral institutions, would not have allowed that. It involved a strenuous program of structural adjustment, privatization, the elimination of price and import controls, redefining the role of government in the economy, and the move to a market-driven economy. The transition was far from painless. As G. Arthur Brown candidly acknowledged, structural adjustment inevitably meant reducing standards of living in the short term. Fiscal compression, wage restraint, and public sector retrenchment were some of the tools that had to be used. But it started to work. Toward the end of that decade, the Jamaican economy was growing. Rate of growth reached 6% per annum. That was up to the time when Gilbert struck. And then, aided and abetted, and I am using these words very deliberately, aided and abetted by the IMF, we fumbled the ball at the start of the fourth decade. Premature and untimely foreign exchange liberalization. I say premature because the fundamentals and the regulatory framework required to defend it were not in place. And I say untimely because loose monetary policy in the months preceding it had created a perfect storm for financial instability. Inflation soared to 80% in 1991. The kind of inflation that Sri Lanka is now experiencing. The measures that were employed to mop up liquidity and rein in inflation shook the very foundations of our financial system at the same time that we had declared a free-for-all in the chase of US dollars. We created a mess in trying to clean up a mess. Cash reserve and liquid assets ratios for commercial banks were hiked to 25% and 50% respectively. If Richard Biles ever did that, you would need a whole JDF to protect him. 25%. Cash reserve, 50% liquid assets. Cash withdrawals from commercial banks in excess of 10,000 Jamaican dollars, except for known well-established businesses, had to be referred to the Bank of Jamaica for approval. Treasury bill rates peaked at 51% in April of 1992. Commercial bank lending rates naturally fell in line, or to be more accurate, climbed in line. Businesses went bankrupt. Banks and insurance companies, which we thought were impregnable, collapsed as if explosive charges were detonated at their foundations. The government, with no fiscal surplus and with its net international reserves in the red, had to step in, almost like a drowning man trying to save another drowning man. Enter FinSAC and all the pain that was caused to businesses and individuals who were indebted to the banks and whose assets pledged as security were now to be foreclosed, and all the pain that the taxpayers had to bear in footing the bill of hundreds of billions of dollars. These missteps could not have occurred at a worse time, because we were now facing a new headwinds, all wrapped up in something called globalization. It was heralded as something that would create a borderless world, offering huge opportunities for countries like Jamaica by providing access to vast markets. the fine print read somewhat differently. We ourselves were to become a part of that vast market by reducing tariffs, eliminating subsidies to domestic producers. We were now required to compete with the most advanced, industrialized, and technologically superior countries, not only in their markets, but on our own supermarket shelves. Many local producers found their products being displaced by cheaper imported goods. It was hardly a level playing field, and we were not ready for this. Our labor productivity had been in constant decline for more than 20 years. Many of our factories were inefficient, producing goods with 30-year-old machinery. Our labor laws were inflexible and obstructive to producers and investors who now had to contend with the ferocity of global competition. Our public sector lacked the agility to be a facilitator rather than a humbug to investment and economic activity. Our financial institutions, battered and bruised by the recent meltdown, were in no shape to respond to the new challenges with the aggressiveness and the appetite for risks that the new paradigm demanded. Not surprisingly, we ended the fourth decade of independence with paltry economic growth of 3.6%. We began the fifth decade of independence, and this is in the new millennium, still picking up the pieces of our earlier setbacks, but we started to get things right, slowly but progressively. In the first 5 years of that decade, we recorded growth of 9%, meager by any measure, but almost twice what we had achieved in the previous 10 years, what we achieved in the first 5 years of the fifth decade. The policy adjustments, although headed in the right direction, were modest. The heavy lifting was yet to come and was forced on us by the impact of the global recession of 2008, the worst of its kind since the Great Depression 75 years earlier. To our credit, not one of our financial institutions went under, as happened in so many other parts of the world, but the effects on Jamaica were still severe. Foreign exchange earnings plummeted, exports shrunk, the bauxite industry virtually collapsed, tourism arrivals declined, so did our revenues. Even remittances fell, as our benefactors in the diaspora were facing their own financial problems. Oil prices soared to a historic record of over $150 a barrel. It hasn't been back up there since. But I remember as Prime Minister sitting in Jamaica House when that news hit me. $150 a barrel. In order to keep the country going, the fiscal deficit that had plagued us for many years widened. We had to borrow excessively, and our public debt, which was already high, climbed to 148% of GDP. We had suffered external shocks many times before. The oil price shock of 1974, the periodic steep price hikes in oil, which happened since, sudden downturns, almost cyclically, in the bauxite and aluminum market, sharp fluctuations in critical commodity prices, several cyclical recessions in the US and in the global markets. Ours is an open economy, extremely vulnerable to what happens in the rest of the world. In addition, the economy was frequently disrupted by natural disasters, hurricanes, severe drought one year, and devastating floods the next. Healthy economies have the reserve capacity to withstand these shocks and quickly recover. It's like the human body that has an immune system that springs into action when we contract a disease or suffer injury. Our country's immune system had long been compromised. Our macroeconomic situation for a long time had not had the resilience to withstand these shocks, and their effects have persisted long after the events themselves. Why have I burdened you with all of this historical narrative? Dwelling on the past is not much help in moving forward. But I believe it is necessary to identify where we went wrong, what caused us to stumble when we did, what helped us to succeed where we did, in order to establish some do's and don'ts for moving forward. Over the last decade or so, we have made some important advancement in fixing the engine. The institutionalization of a fiscal responsibility and debt management framework has already had a significant impact toward achieving the macroeconomic stability.
Bridge 99 FM and Irie Radio 93.5, keeping Jamaicans home and abroad connected.
Yeah, this is Angie from Gardertown. In the square, right at Miss Lou's statue. Come check out Kentucky Drinking Salon with the top chef liquor them. See them like how you see the bridge, 99 FM to the world.
Yo, this is your same boat, isn't me? And you listen to Bridge 99 FM. Remember that, out here, bad music.
Just a kid from the country, living the dream. Just a kid from the country, pushing the wheel. Just a kid.
It's Jamaica's Diamond Jubilee, celebrating 60 years of independence. Jamaica Festival Queen, Jamaica Gospel Star, Jamaica Festival Song, Independence Float Parade, Independence Street Dances, Grand Gala, and a whole lot more. Check the press for details and join us for the excitement.
By global inflation pressures and the likelihood of a global recession, which from experience could persist for the next 2 years. Bad luck, they say, is worse than Obia. We were on track, but we are nowhere near achieving the level of resilience that would enable us to adequately mitigate the effects of these shocks. As we batten down to weather this new storm, there are important lessons that must guide our recovery and our way forward. Among these lessons is the essentiality of the policy consensus and continuity of which I spoke earlier. To the credit of both the government and the opposition, this consensus held, and the program of reform did not skip a beat despite 2 elections and a change of government. It is reminiscent of what obtained in the 1950s and 1960s. Secondly, in terms of the lessons that we must draw, this consensus must not be allowed to be compromised by quarreling over its implementation and management. The hardship being felt by the people because of rising prices and the slowdown in job creation that is likely to result from higher interest rates and the shelving of investment projects, those are real. It provides political opportunities, and the temptation will be there to kick up a rumpus and destabilize the program. Times of instability like this one inevitably undermine business and consumer confidence. We don't need to worsen that by fertilizing doubt as to whether we're on the right track and whether we should change course. Both the government and opposition have a crucial responsibility. If ever there was a time to huddle, confide in each other, reaffirm and strengthen the consensus, it is now. The macroeconomic stability that prevailed up to and during our first decade of independence, when the economy was humming, was vitally important then. Today, it is indispensably necessary. Back then, external loans were easily raised on the London capital market because they were backed by the balance of payment surpluses of the colonies that were pooled with Crown agents. Today, we must source our loans through highly marketable instruments in equity and bond markets all over the world. And those markets pay close attention to our macroeconomic fundamentals and their projections. Although we have done well in recent years, the market knows our past, and it is constantly looking out for the slightest signal that we might slip back into our old ways. Certainly, there must be sufficient flexibility in the program to allow for adjustments to meet extraordinary circumstances, such as have arisen over the last 2.5 years. But we must not allow the poor visibility created by the haze and dust of these circumstances to cause us to take our eyes off the prize. When the winds of a hurricane are beating down on the house and the kitchen and the living room are flooded, it makes no sense for the occupants to start quarreling with each other as to who would have put on sturdier hurricane straps, or who would have caulked up the door bottom better, or bail out the water faster. Instead, we must all get busy to save the house and protect the furnishings because it is the only house we have. The private sector also occupies that house, and it cannot be seen to be only concerned with the bedroom that it occupies, because that bedroom will be of no use if the house collapses. Recently, some elements in the private sector have lambasted the Bank of Jamaica for raising interest rates. Leave interest rates alone, they say. Now, what is to be done with inflation? Run with it? And these are leaders in the private sector, people who I thought would have had a keener sense of economics than I was ever able to learn at university, because they have to live it every day. G. Arthur Brown made the point in an address at the UWI graduation ceremony in 1976 that when sectoral interests are advanced that will inflict economic loss on the rest of the society, especially the poor, it is like snatching milk from the mouths of babes. If we pull together, we will protect the gains we have achieved, validate the sacrifices we had to make, and ensure a speedy recovery and resumption of our momentum. Assuming that we find the perspicacity, the common purpose, and the will to get through this current turbulence with as little damage as possible, what should we expect? A concern that I have, and I believe many of us share, is whether the macroeconomic stability that we have achieved, even if it is preserved and enhanced, will necessarily and automatically lead us to the robust growth that we have longed for. And the answer is no, it won't. I marvel myself that despite the achievements, especially in the years leading up to COVID, economic growth has remained anemic, almost defiant, barely 1% each year. Hardly any better than in some of the darker days. What it tells us is that macroeconomic stability is essential but not sufficient. G. Arthur Brown provides some valuable insights as to what we need to do to close the circle. He begins, as Arthur Lewis did, by identifying our resource base: land, a limited amount of mineral resources, and a large pool of labor. Like Arthur Lewis, he saw that abundance of labor not as a burden, not as a handicap, but as an undeveloped underutilized asset. And therefore, the brain had to get busy to see, how can you make good use of that asset? He recognized that standards of living could not improve unless that pool of labor was gainfully employed. But employed where? And employed to do what? When he was once asked why the government persisted in subsidizing the loss-making sugar industry, G. Arthur Brown said it was primarily to mop up labor, because the alternative would likely lead to social unrest. He argued that if agriculture was to be efficient and competitive, it would have to employ technology and disemploy much of its labor. Jamaica's economic future and its hope of absorbing the resource that it had in abundance, he argued, lay in the services sector, which had become the dominant sector in advanced economies, both in terms of job creation and its contribution to GDP. He cited the tourism industry as an example of Jamaica's potential in services. To achieve a higher standard of living, he contended that a country need not be in possession of large land areas, mineral resources, and other raw materials, but it had to have trained people. Lee Kuan Yew concurs. Speaking of the vital role played by an educated population in the Singapore miracle, he said, and I'm quoting him here, "Supposing we had oil and gas, do you think I could get the people to do this? No. If I had oil and gas, I'd have a different people with different motivations and expectations. It's because we don't have oil and gas, and they know we don't have, and they know that this progress comes from their efforts. So they do it, and do it well." End of quote. Former Prime Minister Edward Seaga once made the observation that there's no country in the world with a well-educated population that is poor. G. Arthur Brown laid out in simple terms the priorities for development and growth: education and training, infrastructure, appropriate legislation and regulations, bureaucratic transformation, and communications. We have made good headway in terms of infrastructure and communications. An enabling legislative and regulatory framework is in place. The bureaucracy has improved significantly, although we still have some way to go. It is in the area of education and training that we have fallen down. No, not fallen down. We have failed miserably. Our education system is in a state of chronic, to borrow Ezra Millwood's colorful expression of alarm. Our schools operate like factories. We run a conveyor belt that moves our children from one grade to the next, regardless of how they perform in each grade. And it spits them out after 5 years of secondary school. In a factory, there's a quality controller who separates the good products from the rejects. In this case, it is the potential employer who does that. The recent Orlando Patterson-led Education Transformation Commission report tells us, if you haven't heard anything that I said up to now, but beg you, listen to this one. The report says that of the children moving from primary school to secondary school, 33% are unable to read. 56% are unable to write. And 57% are unable to identify information in a simple sentence. But we transition them to the secondary school only for their confusion to be more confounded. Not surprisingly, the school leaving results at the secondary level are equally in a state of chronic. Listen to these numbers again. Approximately 41,000 students leave the secondary schools each year. Only a little over half of them do well enough to even sit the CSEC exams. And of that little over half of them that sit the exams, only 28%, that is only 16% of the total cohort, obtain 5 or more passes, including maths and English, which I consider to be the bare minimum to properly equip a school leaver for a skills-based future, productive employment, and reasonable hope for financial independence. What constitutes what we regard as the current generation? I'm talking about those between the ages of 20 and 40. They number approximately 900,000. They account for about 70% of the labor force. Of that 900,000, approximately 650,000 of them left school without the bare minimum of 5 passes, including maths and English. How are they going to find a place in a fast-changing world where any job, whether operating a complex piece of equipment or dealing with waste management, will require critical thinking and problem-solving dexterity? More than 30 years ago, G. Arthur Brown spoke of the increasing use of robots to displace unskilled labor. Email and WhatsApp, downloads and print have all but made the office messenger redundant. Artificial intelligence is now threatening the jobs of even some skilled workers. What has caused our dismal performance in educating our children? Is it that we have not allocated sufficient resources? This year, we're spending $122 billion on education, 1/5 of the budget after you take out debt service charges. Of that $122 billion, around $70 billion, 60%, is allocated to our primary and secondary schools. Sure, we would love to be able to spend more, but are the results that the Transformation Commission revealed commensurate with the $70 billion that we are spending? Let me put it another way. If Minister Clark were able to find another $30 billion to pump into the primary or secondary schools, would the results be significantly different? I'm inclined to doubt it. The Patterson-led Commission report is freshly minted. Its findings and recommendations for reform are not dissimilar to those of the Ray Davis-led task force of 2004. More than $500 billion of expenditure later. And I'm talking about primary and secondary, not complete education. $500 billion of expenditure later. The results coming out of our primary and secondary schools are as shameful as Orlando Patterson and his team found. There are many things that we need to get right to complement the macroeconomic stability that we seem to have finally grasped if we are to achieve the annual growth rate of 4 and 5% that has eluded us for more than 30 years. Yes, we have to fix the crime problem. It drives up the cost of production, and fighting it gobbles up precious resources that could be spent to improve education and health care and infrastructure. But even if we were able to completely eliminate crime, wipe it out, and say to investors here and across the world, invest your capital in Jamaica, the only crime-free nation in the world, where would they find the skills to make those investments work, to handle the technology and provide the intuitive innovation that today's competitiveness requires? As we embark on implementing the recommendations, hopefully, of the Patterson-led Commission, let us not repeat the mistakes of the past. It is good that an oversight committee chaired by Dr. Adrian Stokes has been established to monitor the implementation. It uses the template of the Economic Program Oversight Committee, EPOC, which was first co-chaired by Governor Richard Byles and which played such a significant role in the economic transformation that we have achieved. But we need to be realistic and strategic. Speaking at a conference at Oxford University in 1974, G. Arthur Brown said, "It will take many generations to upgrade the unskilled labor force to the levels needed for modern technology." It's 46 years ago he said that. 3 generations have passed and we are yet to leave the starting blocks. An aspect of our current effort that requires special attention is the fierce struggle between the present and the future. Anyone who has been involved in government at the political or administrative level knows the pressures of the here and now, the myriad of things that need to be fixed, the demands that have to be met, and with the urgency of now. We are being forced to take the position that we will deal with tomorrow when tomorrow comes. I suggest that our policymakers will have to make a paradigm shift. We cannot continue to focus on today at the expense of tomorrow. Let me use an anecdote to explain what I mean. When I was active as a member of parliament, we had a program of back-to-school assistance for students. It was part of the much maligned constituency development program. And we required students, when they came in to seek assistance, normally in months of July, August, they were required to present their school report so that we could monitor how well they were doing. One of the things we wanted to see, for example, is whether they'd been attending school. These were all students from depressed inner city communities where the problems of poverty, lack of proper parenting, noise and distraction created an environment that was not conducive to proper learning. Almost all of them were performing poorly. But there were 2 students, a brother and a sister, who attended 2 of our top performing high schools, and they were an exception. They placed in the top 5 of their classes every term. They lived in a single parent household. So I sent to call the mother because I wanted to find out what made the difference. She did not have a fixed job. She earned a meager living by selling snacks at her gate. She said to me that good health and the 2 children were all that God had given her. So she had to work with that. She said that when she went to church on Sundays and the other church members saw her wearing the same frock, them look for me away. But me can't afford to buy no whole heap of clothes. Me tie up my head because me can't afford to spend the little money on hairstyle. That money I have to make sure the picnic them eat good, that them have them bus fare and lunch money. Every evening, she said, after they had dinner, she saw to it that they sat at the dining table to do their homework. During the long summer holidays, she told me some of the teachers gave private lessons for which they charged a fee. She made sure to find the money to send them to private lessons. And her motivation was simple. Mr. Bruce, I don't want them have it hard like me. So I have to try with them. And if I make it with them, then maybe when I can't help myself no more, they will look after me. I saw her at a funeral about 2 years ago, and I asked about the children. Her daughter had graduated from UTech and was now working with a shipping company. Her son had received a scholarship and was in his final year of medical school, would no doubt have graduated by now. There's a lesson here. Is there a lesson here for our policymakers? Is there a lesson here for all of us, faced with all our pressing needs, the many things that we want government to fix and fix now, otherwise we're going block road? If there's one thing that we need to carve out and say, this is what we are building for the future, this is what we are going to concentrate on, this will be the legacy of this generation, and this is where we're going to spend every cent we can squeeze out of our limited financial resources, it must be on education, not simply pouring it into the same can. I have not finished reading the Patterson report yet. Some elements of it I have difficulty with, but I'm prepared to yield to the expertise that I know went into its preparation. And that carve out means that we must also carve it out of political cascas and finger pointing. Talk about consensus and continuity. That carve out means that government and opposition must join forces to face down the opponents of change, because there are plenty out there, to beat down the institutional resistance to reform, wherever it is to be found, in education, in public sector transformation, in economic reform. The Jamaica Teachers Association is the most powerful pressure group in the country. They know how to play off government and opposition against each other. Their ultimate weapon is to all fall sick on the same day. Performance pay is resisted. Certification requirements are resisted. Schools are closed for 13 weeks out of the year. The children are sent home. So too are the teachers. Yet the teachers are entitled to 4 months vacation leave after 5 years of service. And it is hell and powder house if the Minister of Finance don't find the money to pay them. Which enterprise? What type of business could afford to pay their employees to stay home for 13 weeks out of the year? And on top of that, every 5 years, to pay them to stay home for another 17 weeks. And if government and opposition are not prepared to get together to face down these institutional resistance to change and reform, they're going to continue to not only run rings around us, they're going to run rings around the future of the children. Listen out for the JTA's response to the Patterson report and try to pick up the pieces after it has been shredded. We must be strategic too in the skills that we seek to develop. J. Arthur Brown told us, in 1976, that primary and secondary schools must prepare our students for the tertiary level. And at that level, we must concentrate on the hard options: mathematics, physics, chemistry, engineering, biological sciences, accounting, and economics. Today, he would no doubt have added information technology and environmental sciences. We are producing more lawyers than we need, more mass communication graduates than we can absorb. A student must be free to pursue studies in Greek mythology or Turkish archaeology, if that is his passion, but with all due respect to academic freedom. He shouldn't expect the publicly funded universities to provide the courses or the Student Loan Bureau to finance the studies. We allocate about $13 billion a year to the government-subsidized universities. And I seriously think that government should consider specifying the courses of study to which those funds should be applied. We need to make studies in the disciplines that are critical to national development much more affordable, and securely bond those students upon graduation to work in Jamaica, not necessarily the public sector, whether the public or private sector, but to give back to Jamaica for the investment that Jamaica would have made in their education. J. Arthur Brown, in delivering the Grace Kennedy Foundation inaugural lecture in 1989, expressed confidence that Jamaica had the capacity to achieve the goals he had enunciated and make Jamaica a great little country by the year 2000. We have let him down. We need to atone and make good. We must do what we can afford to do for the present, but we must shift our focus to the future. The future is not just something that is yet to come. The future lies in the hands of the present. When it formally arrives, it will be in the form that it was designed to be, and the time to design it is now. We need to embark on a new crusade, and it has to be rooted in a shared vision, shared not just by the government and opposition and private sector, but by the people of Jamaica. It will require sacrifice, the kind of sacrifice that was shown by that mother that I spoke about. We will have to draw an imaginary line. Those 650,000 current generation persons in the workforce who left school unqualified, some will manage to upgrade themselves. The majority will have to make do with what jobs the economy is able to generate and for which they are capable. Those jobs are not likely to be well-paying jobs or 52 weeks a year jobs. But whatever expenditure we can squeeze out from the today, let us spend it on the tomorrow. Let us draw another line, this time a line in the sand. Let us grab hold of the Patterson Commission recommendations and put every dollar we can squeeze into making them work. Let us make the commitment that as of year X, whenever that year is to be, the vast majority of students entering primary school will ace the PEP test. They will go on to secondary school and whip the CSE exam and enter the labor force or go on to university equipped and eager to work and to be further trained. Persons in that labor force won't have to seek jobs. Jobs will find them. And their purchasing power will create less skilled, demanding jobs for those who preceded them and who were not so fortunate. Let that be the start of a new generation that will have investors beating down our doors because we have what they need. A new generation that will demonstrate a level of innovativeness, productivity, and competitiveness never seen before. A new generation that will truly make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. God knows it won't be easy. Our people have been called on to make sacrifices for much of the last 60 years, and much of it has been to naught. They are suffering from sacrifice fatigue. They will need to be re-inspired. They will have to be persuaded that to do otherwise is to condemn the future to be even worse than the present, that it will make life for their children even worse than what they are going through. They will have to be convinced that this time will be different. And it will require a vision that is so broadly shared and a consensus that is so tightly woven that there's no gap through which they might be inclined to wander. Speaking of the time of independence, J. Arthur Brown said, let me quote him, "There was a feeling of pride and love of country which permeated everyone. There was a spirit of cooperation manifested in working together to achieve independence, and therefore a release of boundless energies to reach a top in whatever field of endeavor we chose. There was outward migration of unskilled labor seeking a better life. But those who had skills were much less inclined to migrate because that better life could be found right here in Jamaica," end of quote. I remember that period well. I was a fifth former at St. George's College. And my dad, who was then Speaker of the House, he took me with him to the National Stadium to witness the lowering of the Union Jack and the hoisting and unfurling of the black, green, and gold. I remember the goosebumps that gripped me. The overwhelming feeling of hope and expectation that there was nothing we wanted to do that with hard work and dedication could not be achieved, because this was a new Jamaica. Can we recreate that spirit? Can we find that new Jamaica that we allowed to slip from our reach? Can we vindicate the life and work and service of J. Arthur Brown, all of which were dedicated to placing that new Jamaica not just within our reach, but within our grasp? I'm prepared to say, yes, we can. And I want to say, for God's sake, we must. Thank you very much.
Now is the time for you in the audience and listening in on Bridge 99 FM and its affiliate stations in the diaspora. Let me call them out. So we have the Beat 104 in London and Irie Jam in New York and the tri-state area, and of course, watching on our socials. Please, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, we have the mics. They're open. Please go towards the mic and you may ask your question.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are, of course, live at the Bank of Jamaica, where we're hosting the third lecture for the G. Arthur Brown, former Bank of Jamaica governor. We've just come out of the keynote presentation from former Prime Minister Bruce Golding, who spoke to the resilience of our institutions powered by the Bank of Jamaica, BOJ, in the post-independence era. Now, our economy is extremely vulnerable to what happens in the rest of the world, he says. So both the government and the opposition do have a responsibility to work together, reaffirm and strengthen the consensus to encourage macroeconomic stability. While we're here at the BOJ, and as we honor the late G. Arthur Brown, let me just reiterate that he was the first Jamaican governor of the Bank of Jamaica. Also, G. Arthur Brown served the institution with distinction in two separate tenures, from July 1967 to July 1977, and then again from October 1989 to September 1992. G. Arthur, as he was affectionately called, served in many capacities during his lifetime, which he dedicated to the development of the people of Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. You're live on the Bridge 99 FM and also Irie Jam Radio in the New York tri-state area and the Beat 103 in London. We take you back to the stage and on the floor where persons are actually doing a Q&A. All those persons who are interested in who G. Arthur Brown was and the status of our country and how was that even impacted by the late BOJ governor.
In the second day phase, a study will be done to decide whether the additional 221 million, approximately 19 billion J, should be invested in the sugar industry that will process 200,000 tons of sugar per annum, and also an ethanol plant that the study will be completed in 2011. So ever since this, which I gave to you in your package, I've been expecting to see where they have invited you to cut the ribbon. And you mentioned ribbon in your speech, the ribbon to that 200,000 ton capacity factory. Sir, if you just go to the very last page of the letter-sized documents I presented for you, I would like to tell you that what happened since you divested the industry, 4 factories have bitten the dust. The first was Long Pond, followed by Monimus, then Golden Grove, and then the famous Appleton Sugar. Why? By the stroke of a pen by the Sugar Industry Authority in 2011, monies amounting to $18 million was transferred in the payment system that Professor Mills recommended in 1987-88. And that system worked for 20 years and then died with the sugar industry. And the SIA knows about it. I have written to Minister Shaw. I've written to Minister Charles. I got a response that they will meet with me, but nobody has. Who would like to hear the numbers? By the stroke of a pen, the amount of money transferred at Frome Sugar Factory between 2011 and 2017 was $5 million US. For Monimus, was 2.88 million US, making a total of 7.928 million US dollar transferred from the factory to the growers. And that is why the sugar factories have died. I will say that Golden Grove, 2.2 million, Appleton, 3.6 million, Worthy Park, 3.6 million. And I must say, so that this is indeed.
My dissertation ends up being longer than mine, you know.
No, I'm not going to. I'm finished right here. I'm finished. I just want to tell you that you.
No, can I say this very quickly? We could spend 2 hours, 3 hours,
Yes.
the whole night,
Yes.
doing a sort of pathological
Former Prime Minister Bruce
examination
Gordon
of the sugar
questions
industry.
from the floor.
Let me just respond very briefly.
Our diaspora audiences know that if you would like to send in your own questions, you can call the Bridge 99 studio line in Jamaica at 876-676-4996. I repeat, the Bridge studio line in Jamaica, 876-676-4996. If you'd like to call the studio line in the New York tri-state area at Irie Jam Radio, the telephone number is 718-723-4743. Again, the number is 718-723-4743. If you would like to send in a question from London, the Beat 103.6, that is 0114-0208-963-9566. Final time, Bridge studio line in Jamaica is 876-676-4996. Irie Jam Radio, New York tri-state area, 718-723-4743. And finally, the Beat, London 103.6 is 0114-0208-963-9566. We take you back to the floor at the BOJ.
Was greater than all of our factories combined.
Yes.
And they closed them because they were too small to be efficient.
But sir.
So we have to find the things that we can do well. And most of those, as I suggested, as G. Arthur Brown suggested, are going to be in services.
Yes.
I'm not saying we must manufacture things, but we cannot continue to ask my helper and your helper to pay GCT in order for us to get some of that money to go subsidize the sugar industry, which is what they were doing. People still hold it against me because we divested Air Jamaica. We're losing $12 million a month on Air Jamaica. But Stewart couldn't make it run successfully. And what people were saying is that fine, it's such a part of Jamaica. Go and find the $12 million a month US to keep it going. That 12 would have been $50 million a month. No. At some point, you have to take some hard decisions and say, no, we can't do that. And that's the decision that successive governments have had to take regarding the sugar industry.
Well, sir, just to respond to that, it's not about the government's involvement. It's about a mistake that the regulator has made in the stroke of a pen that overpaid one sector more than they should have obtained.
Well, I can't speak to that because I don't have the information on that.
Thank you so much, Mr.
I have
Jadu.
put that in a package, sir, and that might be something we could discuss on the program.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jadu. Thank you for your answers, Mr. Golding. We have another question.
Hello. Mr. Jadu, I stopped buying sugar and I stopped eating sugar because it's no good for my health. That's a fact. And I found it a little bit too late. Let's move on. Mr. Howard Bruce Golding, well done. Your last presentation, I think, is excellent and on point. Sri Lanka right now is a good example. If we don't get it right at the macro, that is the case that we can look at what a country can fall into. The question is, are you think will you be putting up a Bruce Golan Museum in your part of St. Catherine, which will, in Eastern Europe is normally called a house museum, that I think could not only create some jobs, but it's a working museum that persons could be employed in, and I think it's necessary.
I can think of much better pursuits for your endeavors.
No, it's for you to do that, not me.
About your business.
Thank you so much. We have another question over here.
Yes, good evening. My name is Earl Dawkins, and my concern is the government agencies that are not implementing their mandate. And I'd like to bring to your attention the Financial Services Commission. This we are in the halls of the Bank of Jamaica. Now, here is an organization that is set up for investment. And this company allow security dealers and brokers to say that the government of Jamaica is a party to a bond, that they are not. They have allowed them to break the Securities Act. They have allowed them to do that. As an example of the FLA that is set up to prevent persons from having guns, and we as citizens discover that they are giving certain people guns that shouldn't have guns.
What specific issue are you raising regarding the financial services?
Well, I'm thinking that it's corruption in the Financial Services Commission, right? And I'm an example. It concerns Digicel. Digicel set up a shell company, not the oil company. They set up a shell company, and the FSC allow it to happen. In Jamaica, we can make some company or person bankrupt for $300,000. Right? The Securities Act, if you read it, say you cannot pretend that you're a company in Jamaica when you're a company elsewhere. What I'm thinking that is needed, and when I look at it, I'm saying we need to look at the agency and see that they are doing the work or trying to project the work that we ask them to do. And if they can't do it, and if they are failing to do it, and if they are being corrupt, you mentioned corruption, we must find a way. And if you can make it one of your projects to look at the FT, it would do a great deal. Because here is the Bank of Jamaica. I can tell you your banking all is becoming a scamming all. Right? Because you would say that there's a difference between what the FSC does and what the Bank of Jamaica does. But all of them is in the same all. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Mr. Golden, if you care to answer, we have.
I'm sure that there are some ears here that would keenly take note of what you're saying. But you have to bear with me, you know. I'm like a pensioner who see things from a distance.
I think we have one more question.
So, good evening, Wayne Henry Planning Institute of Jamaica. Let me thank you very much, Mr. Goling, for tremendous lecture.
Bridge 99 FM continues to be live at the G. Arthur Brown Memorial Lecture. It's also the third staging of it. My name is Judith Bartley. Live also with me is The Beat in London and or sister station, Irie Jam Radio in the New York tri-state area. Now joining us on the Bridge 99 is Miss Lorraine Allen. And Lorraine, of course, is the Special Projects Coordinator at the BOJ. Miss Allen has been serving at the BOJ for 3 decades, and you don't look a day over 20. How did you manage that? She'll tell us more about the beloved son of Jamaica and this event being held in his honor. Now, my first question for you is, why did the Bank of Jamaica decide to host a lecture in honor of G. Arthur Brown?
Well, Judy, I recall that during the period for when we were coming up to our 50th anniversary,
Yes.
when we were deciding what events we should host to mark such a golden anniversary, we decided that given the significant contribution of this great man, not only to Jamaica, but to Bank of Jamaica, that it would be a signal honor to use the 50th anniversary as the year to hold a memorial lecture.
And the 50th anniversary was in
The
2011.
50th anniversary, we celebrated that during the period October 2010 to May 2011. So that was our 50th anniversary year. And the first lecture was held in July 2011. And we selected July
Yes.
because the 25th of July was G. Arthur Brown's, was the anniversary of his birth.
Okay.
So we decided to hold the lecture during the month of July of that year. So that was the year of the first lecture.
Okay. The BOJ is 61.
Well, we will finish our 62nd year statutorily at the end of October.
At the end of October.
At the end of October.
Okay.
So the BOJ, the bank was established by the BOJ Act in 1960. However, we didn't open our door to the public
Yes.
until May 1961.
1961.
Yes.
And G. Arthur Brown was the first Jamaican.
Yes, he was the first
Governor.
Jamaican to be appointed governor of
Appointed
BOJ.
governor. Yes.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit more about the significance of G. Arthur Brown. You would have come and seen the legacy in the bank. Tell me a little bit about how you learned of him and what you
Well,
learned of him.
I joined BOJ in 1992, and unfortunately, G. Arthur retired at the end of the same year that I joined the bank.
Yes.
So we only had a very short period when our paths crossed each other. But my knowledge of him, therefore, was handed down to me.
Yes.
It came secondhand.
Yes.
It was what I learned from my former boss at the time, Jacqueline Morgan,
Yes.
who was the head of the public relations department. She was passionate about G. Arthur Brown. She was here and she had worked with him. And the work that we did in PR, much of the work that we did in PR, somehow impinged on something that he had started at Bank of Jamaica. For example, G. Arthur Brown started the lunch hour concerts that
Yes.
Bank of Jamaica hosts on the last Friday of every month. And he hosted these concerts because he thought that by having artists in every art form, dance, music, drama, it would bring back life to downtown. It would make people come downtown. So we host this free lunch hour concert every month. G. Arthur Brown, for example, established and started the art collection at the bank.
I see we're seated in front of a massive one here.
Yes, this one is called the Garden Party.
Yes.
It was done by Barrington Watson of
Yes.
noted fame in 1966. And this was one of the commissioned pieces that was done for the bank when G. Arthur Brown started the
So
collection.
G. Arthur Brown actually commissioned this one himself.
Yes. He had set up this committee, which was chaired by Barrington Watson.
Yes.
We had people like Pabu Singh and Hyde and all of those, great masters, Jamaican art masters.
Yes.
And they did big murals for us in that first set of commissioned pieces.
And as you
for the-
walk through the BOJ, I noticed that you see a number of pieces of art.
Yes, because we have fortunately continued that part of his legacy, and we have had governors over the years since he
Continue.
has
About
left.
how many pieces of art does the BOJ actually have?
Oh, right now we have some thousands of pieces because we continue to collect. We continue to support the art community, which is what G. Arthur Brown said he wanted the central bank to do, to support the art community and use the work of art to adorn the walls of the bank.
Yes.
And right now we have one of the largest collections in Jamaica.
In Jamaica.
And we continue to support the art community because of G. Arthur Brown.
You know what was exciting for me when I did the tour inside the Money Museum.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about the BOJ's Money Museum.
Well, the Money Museum, as you saw, it's not a very large museum.
Yes.
But we use the Money Museum mainly as a tool to educate our public about the history, the evolution of money.
It chronicles the history, UK history, Japanese,
from money
Chinese.
when we used to use beads and brass all over the world. So it chronicles the history of money internationally.
It shows what the Tainos used in Jamaica.
Used, what the people used in Africa.
Pound, shilling, and pence.
Yes, and then it has a second gallery, which
I saw an halfpenny.
Which focuses on Jamaican, the history and the evolution of Jamaican currency. Yes, and it is free to the public. You can just walk in. If you have a large group, we ask that you make you make an appointment so you can have a guided tour of the museum. But
do schools do that a lot?
Oh yes, we have schools coming in every day from all over the country. Yes. So our museum is a little attraction.
For the first time in umpteen years, I saw an actual paper 50 cent, and it's in mint condition. Paper 50 cent. I used to get a paper 50 cent for my lunch money, and I would purchase either chocolate or strawberry milk. I was able to purchase a patty with that, cocoa bread with that, and then later on in the evening, I was able to purchase a King Kong. I don't know if you remember King Kong.
Yes,
with
but
the
Judy,
big side and the
I when I went to high school, I used to get $1, the purple $1.
Yes.
The purple $1 for the week. That was my lunch money for the entire week. Yes. Yeah.
Paper 50 cent. That was just amazing to see that. And what I've seen is all the notes. And then what I saw were the big paper monies that we used to. That was almost as big as your tablet.
Right. Now our notes are all standardized. All of them have the same dimensions. Yes.
Is any money ever printed in Jamaica at all?
No, we
do. The history?
We do not manufacture our
And we
notes
have
and
never.
coins. We have never. Yes, they are done by manufacturing companies and mints abroad. But we don't make money in Jamaica. We don't print them here as people. You know, some people think so, but it's not done here.
No, it's done in London, right?
Yes, well, we use different companies all over the world. We have some in Germany. So different notes now are made by different companies. So the process it goes out to tender. So it's a open process. It goes out to tender, and the bids are done and so on. And whoever wins that bid, gets.
So is the BOJ's plan to carry on this G. Arthur Brown lecture series year after year? What is the future plan for it?
Well, initially, it was intended to be an annual event. However, as you mentioned earlier in the program, we had a break.
Yes.
We have
9-year
revived it now, and our intention is to try as best as possible to make it an annual event.
Keep doing
And I hope that will be so even after I'm gone, which will be very soon.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. We're going back to the main stage where we're still fielding questions. The keynote speaker, or former Prime Minister Orat, Bruce Golding, is still fielding questions from the stage, and we're going to jump back to the stage with him. This is Bridge 99 FM, also live on Irie Jam Radio in the tri-state area of New York, and the Beat 103 in London.
Religious knowledge is good, but you can pick up some of that at church. Suppose we were to say to those kids, those of you who can manage the 6 subjects, that's fine. You do it. I'm not holding back any kid. But when you say a kid is struggling, Suppose you were to say, now look, you can manage this load here. You go and study 2 subjects. Your timetable would only have maths and English, maths and English, maths and English. We're teaching you maths and English. So if you come out of school and you have done well in maths and English, that's what an employer looking for, you know. An employer not too much interested in you know, the other subjects that are not maths and English. I want you to be able to read, because I've given you a machine where you got to read things on a dial, on a screen. And I want you to be able to calculate. Those are the 2 basics. But if the professionals feel that, well, you need to make it a little round so that they have a better understanding of critical thinking, well, yeah. But I don't know the answer to your question, because I don't know what I do know is that if a kid that comes out barely able to read, not able to express himself, if you were to buy a machine on Amazon and it comes with some instructions as to how you assemble it, he can't make head or tail of it. For all intents and purposes, he's not employable, you know. I mean, if I need somebody to use a machete to chop the grass in the yard, well, he will get a little day's pay, but he can't build an economic future on that.
Thank you so much. Now, do we have any other questions from the floor? Because I have one from Irie Jam, an Irie Jam listener in New York. Okay, and this person is Briscoe, broker and owner of Cross Island Home Smart Real Estate in New York. So we have one from New York for you, Mr. Golding. Oh, so let me read it now. I want to take off my mask. I'm so used to the protocol. Yes. People don't recognize me on road. With expectations of students graduating from colleges and those that don't have an opportunity to go to colleges, what efforts are being made to prepare them for the job market in this changing society? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Mr. Golding. A question from New York.
There are opportunities, you know. And it perhaps relates to the question that the gentleman asked a while ago. There are people who are just skillful. They have a knack. And we have opportunities for them, you know, vocational training opportunities. I don't know to what extent they're making good use of it. One of the things that I don't know is that I know we do it at the University of the West Indies. We do tracer studies so that we track the students for the first 3-4 years after they graduate to see what has happened to them. How many of them have been able to find jobs, and whether the jobs are in the same field that they graduated, or whether they couldn't find a job in that field and they have to be doing something that's totally unrelated to what they graduated in. I don't know whether we do that at the vocational training centers. What I will tell you is that there is a scarcity, and I think the Prime Minister spoke about it recently. There's a serious scarcity in Jamaica of artisans in various areas. Find a good. For all my sins, I happen to have a boat, that recreational boat. I had to take it out of the water, as you do every 2-3 years for maintenance. I'm hoping that the marine mechanic will be able to look at it sometime between now and September, because he's busy. There are not many of them around. One of the things that I've never been able to understand is how people don't look on and say, well, look, if that man is so busy, earning so much money, why don't I go study that particular trade and see if I can jump into it? there's a mismatch. I don't want to go on too long on it. I don't know, for example. I don't know if it's happening now, but it's not something that is institutionalized as far as I know. I don't know whether the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Labor are closely coordinating what the labor market requires so that that can be used to guide what kind of courses are being offered through the various educational training facilities. I don't know. I see too many people who they do have some certificate in their hand, but they can't find work. It's just like the mass comm people. We have so many mass communication graduates leaving the university, the West Indies. I don't know who they're going to communicate with. And they do that course, because one, it is perhaps more affordable. B, and I work with, when I was at the university, I work with some graduate students. And when I try to find out from them, why did you select this particular course? They took one subject here, another subject there, another one there, and they all package it and it all falls under a particular faculty. So that they selected courses because they like it. Not necessarily because it's going to give them a good leg up in terms of career opportunities, but they like this course or they feel that this one is easy. As Arthur Brown says, we have to start making some of the hard choices in terms of what we study and what we train our kids to do.
Thank you so much for tuning in and turning on. We continue to be live. You've just heard from former Prime Minister Bruce Golding, who was the keynote speaker at the third G. Arthur Brown Memorial Lecture. My name is Judith Bodley. We've been live on Bridge 99 FM in Jamaica. We've also been live on Irie Jam Radio in the New York tri-state area. And we've been live on The Beat 103.6 in London. I want to thank you for joining us. And I also want to thank my producer, LaFane Wigan, my production assistant, Jody-Ann Beckford, engineers on location, Jeffrey Brown, Sajay Watson. Thank you so much, guys. Kevin Williams in studio, and Cavell Francis for branding on location. Do have a good evening and stay tuned to Bridge 99 FM.
This outside broadcast, the third staging of the G. Arthur Brown Memorial Lecture, was brought to you by the Bank of Jamaica, the world's leading central bank contributing to the development of Jamaica.
Yes, turn it up, turn it up, turn it up, up, Vice of the one called Big Gangzilla, up, turn it up Thursdays, yeah, with Chris the Dub Master, yeah, the Blaster, right here, Irie Jams, 93.5, love.
Steve here to rescue you from high interest payments with a debt consolidation refinance. Stop paying thousands of dollars every month on high interest balances. Call me at 1-800-277-1462. Refinance, save, and reinvest.
To the rescue.
Onas Promotion and Kiba Mac Promotion presents the Labor Day Fest, starring Straight Outta Yard Come Abroad, the Up Top Boss, T-Jim, Mr. Killer, also performing Shania Mule, Mula J, Rizzo B, and Soca Sensation, and Woody Earwood. Chosen B2B, hosted by Mineral Boss. The Labor Day Fest, Sunday, September 4th, Aloft, 824 Alabama Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. With music by DJ Roy from Irie Jam, Jack Stain from Ranger Force, and Super High. Tickets $65 more at the door. For more info, call 718-915-8816. Purchase tickets online, LaborDayFestBK.eventbrite.com. This event will continue, rain or shine. Security by NYPD.
Are you looking for a professional answering service for your church or business? Call the admin pool at 800-842-3646. 800-842-3646. The admin pool. Rebuilding together can make a difference.
The way you make me feel.
The Solid Love Tour. The long-awaited return of Beres Hammond. Live in concert. Along with Third World. For Singers in Action Part 9, Friday, August 12th at College Street Music Hall at 238 College Street in New Haven, Connecticut. Doors open at 7 p.m. Then on Saturday, August 13th at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, NJ Pack, 1 Center Street in Newark, New Jersey. The Solid Love Tour continues on Sunday, August 14th with Beres Hammond, Third World, and Friends. Doors open at 5 p.m. to the Coney Island Amphitheater at 3052 West 21st Street, Brooklyn, New York. For more info, call 631-600-3185. That's 631-600-3185. Purchase tickets on Eventbrite.com for the Connecticut show and Ticketmaster.com for shows in New York and New Jersey. Part proceeds donated to the AFUWI Scholarship Fund. Get tickets now.
You ever check out the Golden Restaurant Picking Avenue in Brooklyn? The cooked food is excellent. Soups, porridge, chicken, goat, oxtail, seafood, and fish specials. You name it, they have it. And it tastes nice. Plus, them have peanut punch, Irish moss, carrot, coconut water, sorrel, magnum, and more juices and drinks. Golden Cuts at 1655 Picking Avenue near Rockaway Avenue in Brooklyn. 718-342-7576. Catering and delivering services are also available. Bilical, but with Talawa.
It's all about DJ Roy, Chef Garfield, the biggest cruise celebrating Jamaica's 60th independence. Sunday, August 7th. When me say, yours truly, Raga Shanti will be there. I will be entertaining and dancing aboard the Luxury Cruise Line Majesty. Get your tickets at VP Records, Superb Auto in Great Neck, Long Island, Sands Bar and